Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Now, amid the ongoing war in Ukraine, North Korea's recent actions and its growing military ties with Russia have sparked international concern. South Korea's intelligence agency says North Korean troops have now been fully deployed to the front lines in Ukraine, adding that at least 100 of them have been killed and 1,000 injured during a combat. Despite the casualties, North Korea has remained tight-lipped about the situation, raising questions about how much its citizens are aware of the developments. Meanwhile, the regime is seen to have expanded satellite capabilities as recent advancements have been detected at the Sohae Satellite Launch Facility. Amid these shifts, the North's sharp criticism of the Trilateral alliance of the U.S., Japan, and South Korea suggests a deeper strategy at play. For a deeper analysis on this, we invite our go-to North Korean expert, Dr. Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of National Security Strategy. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us from the U.S. is Frank Januzzi, President and CEO of the Marine and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Great to have you.
Good evening.
So let's start right away with our discussion. According to the National Intelligence Service of Korea, North Korean troops have started being fully deployed to the front lines from this month. Well, it's almost 2 months since they were first deployed. How much of a help do you think the troops are for Russia?
Well, thank you for the question. And although the North Koreans have clearly made a significant commitment to Russia in the Ukraine war, providing millions of rounds of ammunition, as well as now 11,000 combat troops, so far the impact on the battlefield has been marginal. Remember, these are essentially light infantry troops. They are skilled in reconnaissance, sniper activities, gathering intelligence, but they are not designed to be main force combat units. And so they are filling a critical gap in terms of total manpower in the Russian army. This has become a war of attrition, but their impact on the battlefield, they are unfamiliar with the terrain of Ukraine. They are unfamiliar with the languages being spoken, Russian and Ukrainian. And so I think that so far, the impact in terms of Russia's military performance has been marginal. But there's a larger strategic dimension to this, which I'm sure we will also get into tonight.
All right, we will look forward to that. So as of now, we are aware that there's at least 100 deaths from North Korean soldiers. As far as I know, these developments have not been reported through North Korea state media, but the North did actually report on the alliance, military alliance with Russia. Dr. Go, do you think the North Korean citizens are unaware of the whole situation?
I think they should be aware of this by now. I mean, despite the fact that there's been an absence of reporting through the official North Korean media. And the reason is because the North Koreans do have access to external information that might not be immediate or right away, like elsewhere in the world. Nonetheless, the information from the outside seeps into North Korea through the reception through Chinese phone network near the border area. They're limited, but then there's a constant exchange, people-to-people exchange between North Korea and China, as well as North Korea and Russia. So the information does get in. And so in that sense, I think North Koreans know that their soldiers have maintained presence in Ukraine. They are probably serving the front lines on behalf of the Russians. So I think that's one of the reasons why the North Korean state is refusing to acknowledge this officially, because even though from the North Korean perspective, North Korean intervention in the Ukraine war it's not justifiable. Essentially, the North Korean soldiers are fighting somebody else's war far away from the region, let alone defend the country or against the traditional enemy of North Korea, such as United States, South Korea, or even Japan. So I think the North Korean regime understands it's going to be politically difficult to defend this decision. I think that's the reason why the North Korean presence in Ukraine is not being acknowledged officially for now.
Right, so they have an idea, a vague idea.
Yeah.
Well, the National Intelligence Service also is monitoring the possibility that Kim Jong-un may send additional troops from the storm course. How do you view this, and do you think there's any room for internal opposition within North Korea?
Well, I think so far the the estimate of the North Korean soldiers sent to Russia has been around 11,000. So, but then we have to take into consideration that even the 11,000 soldiers seem pretty big. We have to take into consideration the casualty rate of the soldiers, both in the Ukrainian and Russian side in this war. It's extremely high. Recently, there have been think tanks and experts who estimated the casualty ratio for the Russian military in the Ukraine war, and that was extremely high. It was like 1,200 soldiers per day. So these are casualties, including killed and wounded. So if you apply the same rate to the North Korean troop size in Ukraine right now, or Russia, sorry, it's around 11,000. So you divide that by 12. So we're talking about 9 days worth of soldiers, manpower right now in Russia. So if North Korea wants to maintain its presence, it wants to maintain combat effectiveness, then it means that North Korea should send more soldiers. So I think this is the reason why there are reports coming out that North Korea is preparing to send even more soldiers to Russia. So Ukrainian sources have speculated that the level of North Korean military present in the Ukraine war could reach as many as 100,000 in the future. And that sounded implausible when the first report of such numbers came out earlier. But at this rate, it could be possible. So it demonstrates how nasty and severe the combat is right now in Ukraine war.
Right. So with this concerns that more people are going, then do you think there's going to be internal opposition within the North Korean public?
So, we're talking about North Korea, not any other country. So internal dissent is never explicit in a regime like North Korea. But there could be discontent, or for example, people feeling that maybe the even North Korean public might think that increased augmented presence of North Korean soldiers on behalf of Russia could even lead to deterioration of the defense posture at home here in North Korea. So I think that could raise the fear that the United States or even South Korea could mount military actions against the country. So in fact, I think one of the reasons why the North Korean military or North Korean regime has been quite inactive in the last couple of months, despite the fact that the last month was the elections in the United States, and traditionally that was a time for North Korea to launch major provocations, but they haven't done so this time. So perhaps the lack of action on the part of North Korea probably is due to the fact that they've maintained sizable military presence in Russia right now, and then the North Koreans probably fear that's undermined their defensive posture. So I think they want to maintain the situation as much stable as possible.
All right. Now, what about Mr. Januzzi? How do you interpret North Korea's growing military cooperation with Russia, including the possible supply of missiles and artillery? What's the strategic significance of this alliance for North Korea?
Well, what you see from Pyongyang is a desperate effort to essentially realign their channels of dependency. In the past, North Korea has been heavily dependent upon China for resources, for energy, for financial investment, for technology. And what you see now is North Korea building an alliance with Russia to supply all of those things, money, oil, technology, as well as potentially some investment. And this represents for North Korea an effort essentially to build greater balance. So they are not overly dependent upon China. And so they also then have more strategic maneuverability as they chart their path on the international stage. I would caution about the casualty figures that we're hearing. I don't think there's anywhere close to 1,000 casualties per day being suffered by Russian forces in Ukraine. And traditionally in warfare, the early casualty figures tend to be rather distorted. And although we are 2 years into this conflict, there's still a lot of uncertainty about the actual casualty figures on both sides. But for certain, North Korea will suffer casualties as they are involved in this war. And I strongly agree with Professor Go when he speaks about the possibility of more North Korean forces traveling to Russia and Ukraine. I think it's highly likely that North Korea will rotate special forces into the conflict. And while at any given moment, there may only be 10 or 15,000 North Korean troops on the ground. Over the coming months and indeed years, it is likely that more than 100,000 North Korean troops will serve in this war, and that many of them will come back injured, and others will perish in the conflict. And I think eventually this kind of a drain on North Korea will perhaps spark some internal reflection about the wisdom of their engagement. But for now, I also agree with Professor Go. I don't see any signs of discontent. This realignment, however, is significant. And Pyongyang expects to get high technology out of Russia to advance their missile programs, as well as know-how to proceed on scientific fronts across the board.
Right. Now, as Mr. Januzzi has mentioned about the uncertainty of casualties, but there's Ukrainian special forces released a video on the attack on over 100 of North Korean soldiers using drones. I mean, not using drones, but engaged in the drone attacks. Now, despite this, there are concerns that North Korea might gain experience with these drone attacks, and then they could use this against future South Korea, inter-Korean relations. Are you concerned about this?
Well, I think clearly there's a concern that the North Koreans are being exposed to modern warfare for the first time in 70 years. We know that the North Koreans troops haven't engaged in division level combat since the end of the Korean War. They didn't send a sizable number of troops to abroad anytime, as far as we know, in any conflict around the world. They've been assisting their partners around the world with advisors and perhaps special forces, and mostly with the military advisors. So this is the very first time that North Koreans are maintaining a sizable troop presence, combat troop presence elsewhere in the world. And so I think there's a lot of catching up to do for the North Korean military. I'm sure they are recording all their experiences, and eventually they want to translate that to their own tactics and strategies in this part of the world. But on the other hand, though, we have to understand that the nature of the combat that's taking place right now between Russia and Ukraine is not really a cutting-edge warfare. So even though we see a massive use of drones, that's clearly a very distinguishing characteristic of this war. But then the technology involved is, there's also a very primitive side to this. What I mean by this is that even though there's a massive use of drones, there's electronic warfare, there's cyber attacks under that. On the other hand, the actual battle lines is reminiscent of none of the Gulf War in the 1990s or even 2000s, or the Second World War. It actually reminds experts of the First World War, of a trench warfare. There's a massive use of artillery. There's trench warfare. So thousands of soldiers are dying on each side to gain not even kilometers of terrain. We're talking about thousands of meters. So essentially, this is a very old-fashioned warfare with drones, though. So I think if North Koreans could acquire more advanced knowledge, for example, very division-level combined forces maneuvering that combines air power and long-range strike capabilities, then that'll be a source of concern for South Korea and its allies. But right now, what the North Koreans are engaged in, essentially they are being seconded to the Russian military, which is engaged in trench warfare. So if they come back with that knowledge to Korea, they'll find out that the South Korean and United States, obviously, they are much more technologically advanced, and that they are much more capable of more dynamic warfare that the North Koreans have ever seen in the current cycle of war in Ukraine. So I think there are clearly sources for concern for North Koreans gaining combat experience. But on the other hand, at the strategic and tactical level, I think that concern is exaggerated.
Okay. Now, meanwhile, the Voice of America has reported that North Korea's Sohae Satellite Launch Facility, located in Dongcheongni, has recently had the roof installed on its key horizontal assembly building. Mr. Januzzi, how significant is the regime's recent development at the Sohae facility, and how might this affect the region's security dynamics?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, Kim Jong-un, in his party plenum last year, promised 3 satellite launches at Sohae this year, and they were unable to accomplish one successful launch. So I think this represents a commitment by Kim Jong-un to continue to modernize his satellite launch capacity to eventually develop some a more robust surveillance satellite capabilities to enhance North Korea's strategic independence and ability to survey the situation on the Korean Peninsula, for its own, rather than having to rely upon information that might have been provided by China or Russia. So this definitely represents Kim Jong-un's scientific side, his desire to move the country forward technologically into a more modern era. But in terms of its significance, again, on the peninsula, in terms of the overall security dynamic, the balance of power between North Korea and South Korea and its allies, the United States, I feel that this is not going to prove to be any sort of a groundbreaking accomplishment. But I think politically it's significant for Kim Jong-un, who has promised to push forward in this area. And it's also significant in that it represents North Korea's growing independence strategically on the global stage. At the Mansfield Foundation, we've conducted a study of the major power interests on the Korean Peninsula. And I think it's important for your viewers to appreciate that each country is pursuing its own agenda, and these agendas intersect. And in the case of Russia, there's a desire to get to extract from North Korea manpower and ammunition, as well as maybe sort of some assistance to help them in Ukraine. But on the part of North Korea, the relationship with Russia and the investment in Sohae and technology represents their drive for a higher degree of global autonomy and independence. If you will, a fulfillment more of the Juche philosophy in terms of being more their own master and more self-reliant on the global stage.
Well, thank you for sharing your analysis from your foundation. Now, Mr. Januzzi, it's also noteworthy that North Korean acts of provocations have somewhat stopped as we enter the impeachment crisis of President Yoon Suk-yeol here in South Korea. How could we interpret the halt?
I think it is instructive to look at North Korea's history in advance of major political events, both in South Korea and in the United States. And here, of course, you have both. You have the impeachment of President Yoon, and you also have the election of Donald Trump. In times of political realignment, North Korea traditionally scales back actions which would commit it to a particular course of action in order to maintain maximum flexibility. So in this case, the quiet to the north of Seoul, to me, I believe, represents uncertainty on the part of North Korea about exactly what will unfold with President Yoon's impeachment. Will he be replaced? Will his government ultimately be replaced by a progressive government in Seoul? As well as uncertainty on the global stage. President Trump has made no secret of his ambition to resume diplomacy with North Korea. And while North Korea so far has offered no particular interest in that diplomacy, I think North Korea wants to maintain a maximum flexibility. And so provocations would be very unwise, as it would tend to sour the pot in advance of a potential opening with Washington.
Right, so they're keeping silent to make use of their future strategies, make it more flexible. So the regime has sharply criticized U.S., Japan, and South Korea for their Indo-Pacific dialogue lately. Dr. Go, what do you think is the North's motive of its criticism and its goal of hostile rhetoric around the Trilateral alliance?
Well, right now, the North Korean criticism of the Trilateral cooperation is routine or even familiar to us. And there are two major reasons for that. And one is strategic, the other one is more practical. So with the strategic dimension, North Korea clearly wants to create the perception that the United States, South Korea, and Japan are getting together, and then also for creating a bloc to counter another bloc. And in this case, the other bloc would be the bloc of the authoritarian regimes headed by China, Russia, and North Korea. And this is the basis for the so-called New Cold War that the North Koreans are claiming that is characterizing the current times. And this is a very convenient argument because North Korea, by characterizing the current international relations, international situation as one of a bloc confrontation, it naturally positions itself alongside with China and Russia, and it creates this perception that China and Russia have to help North Korea in North Korea's confrontation with the United States, South Korea, and Japan. And this is an argument that the Chinese are very much opposed to. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why the relationship between China and North Korea is not that great at the moment. Clearly, China is very critical of North Korea and trying to drive this argument and somehow taint China's other relationship with the United States and such countries like the United States and South Korea and Japan. China clearly craves stability at the moment, which North Korea doesn't care much about. So, and then so moments like this, when the three countries, United States and Korea and Japan, get together to engage in political discussions, this is a prime opportunity for North Korea to highlight this fact over and over. So essentially, this is a part of their propaganda campaign. There's a more pragmatic dimension to this, is that the North Koreans are very much concerned about the increased deterrence effect of the enhanced security cooperation between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. It completely undermines North Korea's investment in the enhanced nuclear and missile capabilities, because the three countries can, not just by sharing information, but also coordinating their actions, also mounting joint exercises, kind of a much more effective countermeasures against North Korean long-range missiles. And so in that sense, I think it really lays to waste North Korea's decades-long investment in missile and nuclear capabilities. And for that reason alone, North Koreans are not too happy about this.
Right, so because they took years to develop their capabilities. Right. Now, finally, regarding the upcoming North Korean plenary session, Mr. Januzzi, which is expected to be held next week, what kind of policies do you think North Korea will pursue next year, especially after, promoting the two-nation theory this year?
Well, thank you. And yes, for the last several years, Kim Jong-un has chose to forego the previous tradition of a New Year's address in favor of rolling out his policy positions in a party plenum. And I think this year you will see both some change as well as continuity. On the change side, I think you will see a stronger emphasis of North Korea on the global stage. If you will, it's his own counterpoint to President Yoon's global pivotal state theory. North Korea now, by joining the Ukraine conflict with Russia, is playing a larger role on a global stage on world events far away from the Korean Peninsula. And although I don't believe that Kim Jong-un will refer to casualties or even to a combat role of his forces in Ukraine, I think he will celebrate the Russia alliance, and he may make reference to North Korean forces being supportive of the Russian effort on the global stage. He will also double down, I believe, on his efforts for economic construction, but here his regime is facing significant headwinds. Economic performance in North Korea has not been strong. The people are not enjoying the level of prosperity that Kim Jong-un has promised for a decade of his governance. But he will nonetheless, I think, exhort his people to redouble their efforts to build a modern socialist state. And of course, he will emphasize still the nuclear arsenal and the expansion of it and the modernization of it. I agree with Professor Go that the US-ROK-Japan alliance presents a strategic challenge to North Korea. But in the face of that challenge, I think that Kim Jong-un will most likely double down on his investment in nuclear weapons. He will also do so in part because even if he plans to have a diplomatic overture with President Trump, he would begin such an overture by strengthening his bargaining position to the maximum extent possible.
All right. I'm afraid we'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks for your insights, Mr. Januzzi.
Thank you very much.
And of course, our Dr. Go.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.